Alright, I'm stepping out of my comfort zone for this video. We're going to be making some resin and burl wood jewelry, specifically bracelets. I never make anything this small or jewelry. That's not my thing, so it's completely new for me and I just kind of made it up as I go, but I think it worked out really well. It's kind of funny though, as a mold company, Crafted Elements is one of our companies that we own. We avoid making molds like this, but I didn't have anything small enough in silicone, so we decided to cut up a bunch of acrylic to make a box. And this stuff that I'm using here is just acrylic cement. It's weld on, I think, number 16. And basically, it's literally welding the plastic together. It's a solvent, so it melts the plastic together to create a solid shape. And my distrust in assembled molds, hence the reason we make silicone molds, it has me here basically going over the entire thing with hot glue so it doesn't leak. I'm just going to go ahead and glue down that burl base that we're using. So once I fill this with resin, the burl doesn't just lift up and float. So my daughter's helping me with this project. I got her to pick a color, and the key here is that we don't want a really, really deep pigment. So we've got a little bit of black diamond pigments. We've thrown into some Total Boat Fix Set, which is a casting epoxy. It's usually good for like an inch, but this is such a small pour that, an 1.5 inches, 1.75 inches, I think is what this is. This epoxy resin is going to work well. And as you can see, we've got a tint to that resin, not like full blocking opacity, right? So we can still see that burl, which is kind of key. Coming back the next day, the resin's set, so I'm prying apart that mold box. And in hindsight, I probably wouldn't even need to make a mold box out of acrylic. I could have literally just made a plywood box, and it would have even saved me this step here, which is basically gluing down that detached block that we took out of the mold to a piece of plywood. And I'm doing this because I want to have something for my clamps and my CNC to grab. However, if I really just made the whole thing out of plywood to begin with, like an entire solid plywood box, I could have probably skipped all these steps and gone right to the CNC or a hole saw. And I'm going to talk about that in a second, but right now I'm just entering the size of that block in the CNC. I'm going to make an inner circle and an outer circle, basically creating the ring or the bracelet part of the ring. And then I'm just visualizing it so I can see what it's going to look like. But in hindsight, you could have literally done this with a hole saw. You could use a big hole saw for the outside, small hole saw for the inside, and basically your delta would have been the bracelet. But of course, I've got the CNC machine. Why not do it with the CNC? But just know that you could definitely do this project with a large and then slightly smaller hole saw. So I'm going over with the CNC machine using that program that we did in Vectric VCarve. And basically we're just leveling it out with our 1/4 inch bit. I normally wouldn't level with a bit like that, but it is what's already in the machine and it's a small block, so I just used it. Here we're going ahead with the inner cut, which again could have been done with a small hole saw. And then right over here we're doing with the outer cut. And you can see the difference, or the delta, is essentially what's going to make up our bracelet. Now that we basically got a resin wood tube, we can bring it over to the bandsaw and slice it up into the bracelet roughs. So essentially I've got like 1.75 inch total thickness of that block. So I'm going to cut it into 2 different bracelets. So I'm just using the fence on my bandsaw to set the distance, and then we can just cut them into 2 equally thick bracelets. Now this part might be a little bit sketchy. I was a little bit worried about doing this, but I've never had to use something this small and delicate on my router table before, but it seemed to work out. I didn't get any kickback or any issues and didn't cut my fingers off, so I think we're good. But basically I'm just chamfering the outside or rounding the outside of these bracelet edges, just with a 1/4 inch round over bit. And the next thing I'm going to do, and again, reiterating the fact that I normally work with not huge things, but charcuterie boards, small tabletops, things like that. This was kind of beyond my comfort zone, but I figured using the palm sander would be an efficient way to do it, and actually was. Like I started with an 80 grit, I went around the sides, using the palm sander and then my HDP tabletop, the bracelets would actually kind of spin around as I was sanding them, and that kind of helped me. I didn't have to manually move them all around, and I got a nice, good, even sand. Once I went through, I think 80 then 120 with my palm sander, I just got out the sponge sandpaper, I think 180 grit and then 220 grit. And then basically just going to town by hand just to get it as kind of rounded and soft and sanded up as possible. And then I think I used my wet sanding stuff, so I grabbed some water and then started wet sanding them a bit. It's just a laborious process. I mean, it's sanding. There's nothing really special other than just going to town and making sure you get everywhere. And the last thing I do is grab my 400 grit and then just go over the entire bracelet. I didn't have any 400 grit sponge paper, so this is me just using my palm sander. I think the result was pretty good. It still ended up matte because, again, I was only using up to 400 grit. If I wanted to go higher, I would get like more of a clear finish. But to finish these guys off, I'm just using Total Bolt's Wood Honey, which is something I normally use on charcuterie boards, but I figured, hey, if it works on charcuterie boards and it's safe enough for that, why not use it for jewelry? And honestly, it looks amazing. Like, it gives you a nice polished finish while not being ridiculously shiny. I'm letting it sit here for about 20 minutes in the material, buffing it off, and that's what we're left with. So we've got a nice kind of a visually see-through finish on the resin because we didn't heavily pigment it, but I think this turned out really, really well, and that was my first attempt at jewelry. Let me know what you think in the comments below.